Welcome in, Illini Nation. Is this the best week to be an Illini since, I don't know. We'll talk about that. Me and Sonny will, but my goodness, welcome to Illinicast. Austin Berkland here alongside Sonny Verma. And my goodness, Sonny, what a week to be an Illini fan. It's one of those count your blessings and remember that you're in the good old days. Whenever you're in the good old days, this is it right now. And with the way Josh Whitman is acting, there could be a lot more of this coming up.
Exactly. It's one of those situations where there's generations younger than us who we almost don't want them to celebrate because, like, wait, no, you haven't gone through the tough point. You don't understand. This is not normal. The fact, a football team winning 10 games, a basketball team coming off an Elite Eight performance, and then recycling through 10 players and all of a sudden still being potentially the best team in the Big Ten Conference. It's nice that for the first time in a very long time, and I mean very long time, I'm sure we're going to talk about this. I don't ever remember the both sports being this good at the same time as we have right now.
Yeah, Sonny, I was seeing a tweet from a college student that said I accepted my decision to go to U of I and the scholarship in 2020. That's whenever I started to really follow Illini sports, and they said I don't know how the true old heads of Illini sports dealt with this, with a screenshot of the Wikipedia of the Tim Beckman and Lovie Smith eras. And these college students at the U of I are the most spoiled generation in a long time, maybe since the students that went to college in '05 to '07, going to the Final Four in basketball and the Rose Bowl in 2007. I mean, that's what kind of era we're talking about. Beating an SEC team for the first time ever in program history, and then setting the record for the largest lopsided win against a top 10 team on their home court in basketball in only a few days span. That is something that you are like, oh man, remember when this happened 20 years ago and then this happened 15 years ago?
Right.
No, this is all within the span of 7 days. It's just crazy to think about that, Sonny, as well.
And it's just the parallel rides that both programs are riding right now, right? Like, I feel like even though you compared it to from about 20 years ago, right now both programs seem so stable. We have the right guy in charge, and I think that's why we're kind of appreciating it so much. It doesn't seem like either basketball or football it's something we have to be uneasy about next year or be worried about or nervous about the future of it. It really looks like we've got the right guy in charge in Brad and Brett, and ultimately the right guy in charge of the athletics department in Josh Whitman. So it's just kind of as you kind of said, this is just an era that Illinois athletics is in where we just need to sit back and every now and then look around and just enjoy the time that we're spending.
Right. I mean, how many times do you go to those like top 100 songs of like the 1980s and like 75 of them are one hit wonders? This is not a one hit wonder anymore. Brett Bielema has gone to 2 bowl games in 3 years. Brad Underwood with what he's doing, beating the number 9 team in the country, Elite Eight last year, a number 1 seed 4 years ago at this point, and winning in different styles, winning with different personnel. This is what dreams are made of for athletic programs. And you look at football next year with the possibility of J.C. Davis returning. I talked about the core four all season long. The core four is still going to be back for 2025. And then you think of Gabe Yakis coming back, Xavier Scott coming back as well. I mean, that is what sustainability looks like in the world of college sports nowadays. And not a lot of programs can say they have it. Illinois is one of the very, very few that can have it to this extreme level.
Yeah. Again, it's stability, right? When was the last time Illinois basketball and Illinois football was considered like the stable team in the conference? Usually, at least on the football side, we're worried about, is this head coach going to be canned the next year? Every recruiting cycle, we're worried about being negatively recruited against. On the basketball side, right before Underwood got here, it just seemed like the trend was going down as opposed to up, like we've been historically. Right now, it's a steady ride up on both sides. Maybe a little bit more aggressive on the basketball side, but we know that the roller coaster that is the football team is much tougher to begin with, and so because the job that Brett has compared to what Brad has is a lot more difficult. But he's getting it done, and I know we're going to talk about this after the basketball game. But 10-3, as you said, beating an SEC team for the first time, and really, I mean, maybe it may have more to do with the coaching antics off the field. Like the game was talked about by a lot of people, and a lot of people, I think, were introduced to Illinois football in the national scale.
Absolutely. We'll get to the football here in a little bit, but let's talk about the freshest meat, and that is duck meat that Brad Underwood made in Eugene, Oregon. 109-77 victory against the Oregon Ducks. And what makes this game even crazier is that if I told you that Kasparis would have 0 points in the first half, that Illinois would start 0 for 7 from behind the 3-point line, I would think, oh, this is probably a 9 to 11 point loss. Maybe came back in the final stretch of the game. But no, 109-77, and your biggest contributors were Ben Hummerkaus and Dre Gibbs Lahorn and Jake Davis. I mean, this is what the depth we were talking about before the season, Sonny, really got going, where you thought, okay, if Illinois can have that depth and those stars aren't shining, it doesn't really matter because we have more depth than you. We're going to beat you just by way of attrition. And everyone talked about that Oregon bench, but the Illinois bench really stepped up in Eugene and laid the groundwork for the stars to really shine in the second half. And again, that's not even talking about what Trey White did either in the starting lineup, what the performance he had. So a lot of positives here. It just is amazing that this is the formula that beat a number 9 team on the road.
That was the best team in the country last night. And like it's hard for me. I don't care who they would have faced off against. You could put a Auburn in front of them. You could have put Tennessee in front of them. Kansas, whoever your top 5 is, they would not have beaten that Illinois team that played on Thursday night. And that's what makes this team so intriguing. That's why we continue to watch. We know that they're young, and of course, there's some frustrations with certain individual players. It seems like at least over the last month or so. But when they're on, you can see the type of offense that Brad Underwood has in place, and more importantly, and maybe we just need to acknowledge that this Illinois basketball team is a very good defensive team, because I mean the net rankings tell you that all the analytics tell you that. Obviously Brad, after that Ole Miss exhibition game, kind of, I feel like, I don't know if he tried to set us all up, saying a seventh grade basketball team could score 70 on them. But, every player knows his role. And, it's just they bought into the system. They bought into the culture, which is amazing because, again, there's 10 new guys. There's no culture. The culture is, one guy who comes off the bench and, another player who decided to redshirt. The culture is Brad Underwood. And right now, Brad Underwood and that culture has us as arguably the best team in the Big Ten Conference.
Yeah, I mean, whenever you looked at that game last night and you really thought about like the different lineup combinations and everything like that, it almost just was like it doesn't really matter. Like this team has a group identity as opposed to a culture that they are going to offensively rebound. They're going to shoot a lot of 3-pointers, and they're going to clean up those messes and hopefully get a layup because of an easy offensive board. That seems to be what the team identity has kind of looked like offensively. And then defensively, this was Ben Hummerkaus' best game. I don't care what Brad Underwood said earlier on in the season about he had the statistically best defensive games and all that just to hype up his own player, I feel like. This was the true eye test, defensive test that Illinois had, where fans can be like, you know what, I see what the analytics are talking about. This is why the defense is doing really well. They were getting into some passing lanes. They were really denying the ball really well against Oregon. And then the only way they got easy points was if there was a blown assignment randomly or just an offensive rebound by the Oregon Ducks. That's the only way Oregon had easy buckets. So I think this was the first eye test game for fans, like that really showcased that this is a good defense. in previous games, there was a little suspect at times. I don't care what the analytics had to say, but visually, this was the best defensive game I've seen by the Illini.
Yeah, let's give credit to Ben Hummer. When I think he's the reason that I think in my preview for the Oregon game, I said if Ben can get to 3 or 4 3-pointers, I don't see Illinois losing. And he ended up with, I believe, 4 on Thursday night. And it's because
Yeah, 4 of 7.
we're seeing what this team looks like, right? We know Kasparis is going to get his 15 to 20. We know Avicic is a walking double-double. Over the last 6-7 games, Trey White and Kylan Boswell are giving you 14, 15 each as well. If you add a fifth guy to that, a guy to space the floor, the best defenses in the world are going to struggle because there's just simply weapons everywhere. And Ben is the key in some senses because he's the one guy that you hypothetically, theoretically, can't leave open. You can't give 3-4 feet of space because the 3-pointer is going to go down. And so that's why if this is kind of the statement game from Ben Hummerhouse, if this is his bounce back game and moving forward, he plays like what he played like on Thursday night, I think Illinois is in really, really good shape.
I mean, think about how many points were left at the table still, Sonny. Like, Kylan Boswell had some easy bunnies at the rim or some shots that were open. Like, you look at his stat line of 5 for 14 last night. This could have easily been a 115-point game for the Illini if some of those Kylan Boswell shots went in. I know Tomislav only had 3 for 8 from the field as well. So I know that's really nitpicky and everything of a 109-point win, but I'm just showcasing the true offensive firepower that this team has, that there were still some points left at the table in an unbelievably offensively crazy game by the Illini. So, like, this isn't even a final form, I don't think, of what this offense can look like.
So there were a lot of good tweets on Thursday night, especially being celebrated by Illini Nation. But my favorite one was from a friend of mine, Joe Jackson, who does the Feed the Post show on YouTube, which is fantastic. He said, with 10 minutes left in the first half, Illinois had 16 points. They then scored 93 over the next 30 minutes. That equates to 3 points a minute for the rest of the game. Now, with athletics, you just want to score 1 point per minute. You feel pretty good. The fact that, as you said, like, we played amazing for 3/4 of that basketball game. For the first 10 minutes, we only had 16 points. We didn't score for the first 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And we got off to a slower start, and then you just see an onslaught. And again, that's when it just shows you, like, when Illinois is playing like that, there's just, and I know I'm a fan, and there's bias involved, but how do you defend that? Because Spurs had 0 points in the first half, and Illinois was up 7 on the road against the number 9 team in the country.
It's wild. It simply is. Like, plus, one other thing that I really liked from this Illini team last night is that the turnover battle was even at 10. There's been some moments by this young Illini basketball team where the turnovers have kind of piled up, and it's been some nonchalant ball handling from Kasparis at times, but I thought last night they did a great job of protecting the basketball, which is another sign of growth for this young team. Like, this is still a very young team that doesn't have a lot of college basketball experience together, and I can only assume that, yes, there's going to be some freshman lumps here still, but it's just going to be growth from here on out. And by the time March hits, or by the time that February game against Duke at Madison Square Garden hits, this is going to be still a more complete basketball team as this season goes along.
And that's what I'm hoping for, right? I think even in our season preview episode, I said we would struggle in that out-of-conference portion of the schedule just because the team's so new. And basketball is such a game of rhythm and just, nuance that I felt like it would take time for these guys to really gel and really understand each other's styles of play, where they like to shoot it from the court, etc. But I said once the Big Ten season starts, I think this team could very well win it all. And hopefully, I mean, in my preview show, I had us losing against Oregon. just because I've got the full confidence in Kasparis, of course, and as of late, Trey White and Kylan Boswell are really just embracing their role as like the super role players on this basketball team. But I just wasn't sure who the Marcus Damask of this basketball team was going to be. And so you don't necessarily need a Marcus Damask if you have five guys scoring double figures. But I didn't have much faith in Ben Hummerkaus, Will Riley, DGL, all those guys. And yesterday, we're playing Oregon. Oregon, I believe, before the game started, was the odds-on favorite to win the Big Ten Conference, according to FanDuel, at least a couple nights ago. And so, my thinking was, hey, West Coast game. This is tough for even any basketball team, even a veteran basketball team. And you're going up against an Oregon team, which may not have a superstar on it, but they've got like 7 or 8 really good basketball players. They got one of the best coaches in the country. And so I was like, what? Until I feel confident a second guy is going to step up for Illinois, I'm going to go ahead and peg Oregon to win that game. And that's not what happened. That's not what had happened at all. Basically, the Illinois that I wouldn't even say envisioned. There's no one that could have envisioned an Illinois team that looked like last night. But a glimpse of what I think Illinois can be, we saw yesterday, and we saw that that type of team breaks records when it comes to the way they defeat their opponents.
Yeah, there was a spot in the game. It was only worth 2 points, but that I fell in love with a certain player, and maybe that certain identity can grow. There was a booty ball moment by Ben Hummerkaus. It was an easy layup, post up booty ball by Ben Hummerkaus, and I was like, "Hey, is that something? Is that something we're going to see later on in this season? Is this a new element to this Brad Underwood offense this year? Is this going to give Ben Hummerkaus some confidence that may be different than just shooting the 3-point bucket?" Because I mean, Ben Hummerkaus last night was awesome. He had that dunk that shattered the rim almost. He had that booty ball moment. The 3-pointers were dropping. He was playing tough defense as well, and it kind of reminded me of last year where Quincy Guerrier had some struggles at times throughout the season. Like there were some long droughts where Quincy wasn't giving you much, and you were like, "Oh, is Quincy that guy?" And maybe Ben Hummerkaus just had a lull, figuring out where he is on this team, because there is a lot of great talent, and that talent also needs to shine through. Maybe Ben has finally found his identity, and maybe he can utilize that in Big Ten play more so than this non-conference bout that Illinois just went through.
And maybe we just all need to, and I think we have, just readjust our expectations, right? And I guess I'm guilty of it because I think I just said it, 90 seconds ago. But even John Fanta during the offseason called Hummerkaus a potential, Dalton Connect type of
Yeah.
acquisition for Illinois. Maybe what Ben Hummerkaus is not a Marcus Domask, is not a Dalton Connect, but just a 6'9" guy who can shoot the lights out of that basketball. And you know what? For this basketball team, that's okay. Because Kylan is better than I thought he was going to be. Trey White is certainly better than I thought he could be. So if Ben Hummerkaus is just a really good role player, I'm okay with that. Obviously, some of the vitriol from the past month is just because the shots weren't going in, and the shots, despite what Brad Underwood says, is by far the most important thing that Ben brings onto the basketball court. Defensive issues aside, certainly on the eye test, it does not pass, as you mentioned earlier. But if Ben is making his open 3-pointers, if he's spacing out that floor for Kasparis, for Kylan, we're willing to forgive some of the issues that he has on that other side. And I'm hoping that, shooter shoots, right? And sometimes you just want to see the ball go through the hoop. And this is an issue I think, I'm so hoping that might be similar for Will Riley. Once you see the ball go through the hoop 2, 3, 4 times, all of a sudden your confidence comes back, and you feel like everything you throw up there will go in. And I'm hoping that we've kind of turned the corner with that.
Philip makes a great point here. He said Dane was unplayable most of the regular season and was pivotal for the postseason. That is exactly right, Philip. I mean, Dane was a guy that you were like, oh man, defensively he's not doing anything to help this team in Big Ten play late last year, and then something clicked in the NCAA tournament where that physicality was needed, and I think we saw a lot of that with Burns from NC State. I mean, those two guys played very similar games in the NCAA tournament, and to have a 4 as a lockdown shooter, maybe a little bit of booty ball. I'm hoping and praying that's going to be continuing on. Maybe that can be the matchup nightmare for the Illini as we go on later on in the season. And then Philip again says Will Riley is 18. I just thought I would remind Austin of that. That is right. Misspoke there in the show with Ant Wright. I said he was 17. And Alex Austin turned 40 on his 23rd birthday. That is correct. Also, I'm the 23-year-old. There we go. But yes, age discrepancies aside, we did see Will Riley last night against a big-time opponent. 5 points, 2 for 5 from the field, 1 for 3 from the three-point line last night for that 18-year-old. And I know it's early to talk about like NBA draft prognostications. I think I've seen him drop to like 17th in the big board according to Yahoo Sports. But I kind of feel like if he's here another year with an NIL package, I think that can propel Will Riley more than just going right into this NBA draft situation with the lack of physicality that he currently possesses.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this on this show. I've said this on Locked On Illini. I really think the 2025 Illini team has national championship, like top 5 favorites to win the national championship potential. And a lot of it is built around a guy like Will Riley. I still haven't given up hope on him yet this year. I still think that there's going to be at least 1 or 2 games that he single-handedly wins by himself against some of this Big Ten competition, and then we'll see whether the adjustment has been made or if it's just one of those 1 or 2 games. But a sophomore year, Will Riley, coming back with a senior year, Kylan Boswell, a senior year, Trey White, a technically junior year, Tomislav Avicic, and a guy who I think is going to be an all Big Ten player next year in Morez Johnson. That Illini team next year is going to be an absolute beast to deal with. And, Will Riley could play the role as the main guy on that basketball team. But right now it's obvious he's searching for confidence. I do like the fact that he's still shooting. I like the fact that we were up 30-plus points last night, and I think he had 2 of his baskets only with 90 seconds left in the game. Just same thing with Ben, right? Keep shooting it. Watch it go through the hoop, and then eventually, hopefully the touch comes back.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned next year's Illini team, and there's a guy that could play a major role on that team if he wants to stay. And I know the question's asked once again after another great Dre Gibbs Lahorn game. That guy may be a big-time player on next year's Illini team, but will he be a part of that? I don't know. That's a huge question mark. But I loved what I saw from Dre last night. Took things to the rim and shot the three-pointer, 1 for 2 from there, and just was that team player when Illinois needed it desperately.
The first half was all Dre and Jake Davis. 2 guys who I think that the rest of the team just saw the energy that they were bringing, the plays that they were making, and they built off of that. And again, being up 7 points on Oregon at halftime without your best player scoring a single bucket, you already talked about Dre Gibbs Lahorn. I really like Jake Davis. Jake Davis really does play like a coach's son. The guy you throw out there and he plays minutes because he's not going to really do anything bad. Whether it's rebounding, he knows where to be. He takes good shots. I thought he was a kid who was going to redshirt this year. From the tape that I saw, I thought maybe 1 year of just refining his body, working with Fletch would do wonders for him. But now I'm glad he had more points this game than he had all season long combined, and I can see. And again, we just talked about it. Jake is another guy who I think will take another step, even more so on next year's basketball team, and I'm really excited for his future.
Yeah, Jake is that YMCA player that you're like, oh, the surfer dude wants to play basketball. Okay, let's let him on in this run, and then you play him, and then you're like, has this guy missed a 3 pointer? What's the deal here? And he just does all the little things. You're exactly right with the coach's son analogy as well, and. It's crazy if you would ask me who would play more minutes, Jake Davis or Kerry Booth in Big Ten play. I would have been like, oh yeah, Kerry Booth for sure. And Kerry Booth is relegated to mop up minutes at the very, very end. I mean, he got last night 2 minutes of play. There's obviously a lot missing from that game that Brad Underwood sees in practice, but Jake Davis taking those minutes and running with them and being that kind of slow-mo basketball player to really just calm the tides and make a three-point shot when you desperately need it is exactly what Illinois wants and needs from Jake Davis.
Yeah, he's not going to do that every game, right?
No.
But it'll be nice, if he has 2 3-pointers in the first half. Well, what does that do? That gives the defense another guy that they now have to worry about the rest of the game. And
Yeah.
that's what makes it seem so dangerous. It's just the sheer amount of weapons that they throw out against you. Like, I genuinely feel that Oregon in the second half got overwhelmed. Like, they knew whatever they threw at Illinois, Illinois just threw it right back with whether it's a 3-pointer here or an and one there. And the number 9 team in the country just was dominated.
I mean, if I'm a scout for a Big Ten team and like they say, all right, you have Illinois, and you're writing up that scouting report. You have obviously number one is Kasparis, where you're like, okay, this is gonna be the guy. Really hone in on him, double team him at times during pick and rolls and stuff like that. And then you're like, all right, second guy. It could be this guy. It could be that guy. It could be this guy. It could be that guy. It's making scouts from other Big Ten teams really earn their money whenever they scout Illinois, because that number 2 guy can come out of Jake Davis. It can be Drake Gibbs. It can be Morez Johnson. I know he didn't have the best game. It can be Will Riley still. It can be Kylan. It can be Thomas Loft. There's so many options for who that next guy can be that you really can't hone in on that second guy to be like, all right, we're going to get him, and then we're going to have to really make Illinois work for their offensive buckets. I mean, it's just wild to think about the offensive firepower that this team has.
All credit to Brad Underwood, right? I mean, he talked about it over summer that he loved last year's basketball team, but after that loss in the Elite Eight to UConn, he's like, that's what a national championship team looks like. And he adjusts on the fly constantly, and it's one of the things that we love about Brad. And he decided to, well, he didn't necessarily decide, but he was forced to replace almost his entire roster. And what he did is implement exactly what he saw from UConn last year, and that's just a lot of length. I think we're the second tallest team in the country, if not the tallest team in the country this year, and a team that can score. And, scores the one thing, again, 109 points yesterday against a very good defense. It's just, we're in a really good time. I know this is just a throwback to the intro, but it's just a really, really good time to be an Illini fan.
Absolutely. The ceiling is national championship for sure, just because of the offensive firepower like you saw last night. But the floor still can be pretty low, just because you saw what Kentucky did against Oakland last year in the NCAA tournament, where a team can just be veteran laden and exploit some of the from some of the lower classmen for Illinois. But that's why you do have Kylan Boswell. That's why you have Trey White to help with those moments where you need some veteran leadership. And that kind of almost extends to Drake Gibbs as well, because he's been to the NCAA tournament as well and played some big time minutes, and especially in that first and second round matchups in the NCAA tournament. But yet, that's not the only great thing that happened this week. We are transitioning into the football side. Illinois 21, South Carolina Gamecocks, a crying 17 points. What a victory by the Illini. First ever game win against the SEC. Just what were your initial thoughts watching that game, and then finally the celebration whenever Illinois won?
I mean, it's just credit to Aaron Henry, credit to the coaching staff. I think the coaching staff is where we won that game against the Citrus Bowl. I really think, based just purely on the reactions of the South Carolina coaching staff, that it felt like they didn't scout us in any sort of ways. Like the fact that they're surprised that Illinois were subbing so late, whereas Brett came in prepared. We've already done this with the type of quarterback sellers is we played a guy like Daniels earlier on in the year, Childs earlier on in the year, and you can tell like the scouting was just there. Don't let Sellers beat you with his legs. And it's just we're 9.5 point dogs, but we were in it the entire time. And I'm really glad Josh McCray was able to redeem himself after that non-fumble called fumble on that opening drive, just because there's a potential for a big momentum shift there, right? Like we were on that first play. I think it was like a 60-yard throw to, I forget who the receiver was, but we basically have it at the goal line, and Josh
Yep.
McCray, you assume is going to punch it in. We're up 7-0, only a couple minutes into the game, and then we lose the ball, and there's like, was that the moment? The history of being an Illini fan starts kicking in. Like, here we go again. Here's a Illini being Illini. But, you know, and I apologize to Brett because Brett, I feel like, talks about this in every interview at least once a month. He doesn't want to be burdened by the past. He's like, I can't control any of that. All I know is things are different now. And I need to get into that mindset that, hey, yeah, if, we had an unfortunate fumble at the goal line, but that doesn't mean the game is over because Brett doesn't think the game's over. These players don't think the game is over. And it was a really impressive win over the number 15 team in the country, a team that many were arguing should have been in that college football playoff.
Yeah, I mean, after the Illinois Oregon game, the Nebraska Illinois football game replay took place right afterwards,
Yeah.
and there was some big time comparisons to that game and the South Carolina game where there was some definite good mojo that happened for the Illini in both games. But there was also some moments where you were like, okay, this is where Nebraska could have harnessed the momentum. This is where South Carolina is going to harness that momentum. And they never did because Illinois' defense did just enough to stop it, to get that field goal attempt, to just stop them on that third down. I mean, that is what Illinois football has kind of turned into, is that true bend but don't break defense. And that kind of was the case, especially on that last possession against South Carolina, where it was the fourth down play, and you were like, okay, is this going to be the heartbreaker of all heartbreakers right here? But no, Illinois just sent the right amount of pressure, forced Sellers to make a bad pass, and it was down to the ground for a 6'4" tight end to try to scoop up, and he didn't. I mean, that's the mentality of this Illinois team, is they're going to give up some yards, but the points are always going to be lacking for that team that they're going up against. And that's how you really put yourself in position to win some big time football games, is to just stay in it enough, build that momentum for yourself, let the confidence grow of your offense. And that's exactly what happened for the Illini, where they were really feeling themselves. They were in the barge formations, and you're like, all right, this is Brett's bag right here. Let alone all the coaching drama that was happening between him and Beamer. It was just like a show of confidence that Illinois had in themselves.
And that coaching drama, obviously we'll talk about that in a second. But as soon as that was kind of done, South Carolina comes back and they score a touchdown, right? And again, for me, it's just like, oh boy, did we wake up the giant, right? Right? Did we wake up the sleeping tiger, or whatever the saying is? Um, but that shows you the growth of this Illinois team. Like they truly feel confident, and that's why you and I, for the first 3-4 minutes of this episode, talk about just how nice it feels to have a football team this competent, a basketball team this competent, because we just got finished telling you how next year's basketball team can be a national title favorite. This football team is returning potentially 17 guys on next year's starters on next year's team. This team won 10 games already, and next year's schedule is not that difficult. We've talked about that before. It's just we. The key is just to watch a team turn the corner, and I really think this year we did. Brett said when he got hired on here that I've got to change the mindset of this team that on 50-50, outcomes that you're not always automatically going to lose and go in with the expectation you're going to lose. And I think he's done that in particular this year. I think we have one of the most clutch quarterbacks in all of college football. I really am of the mindset that as long as we keep it close in the fourth quarter, keep it close at the end of the game, and you give Luke the opportunity to win the game for us, he's going to do it. And to have him come back as a senior next year, I can't tell you how excited I am.
Yeah, I mean, the wide receiver core did their job as well, and what makes me excited is that yes, it's always nice to see Zachary Franklin do what he did. Hank Beatty was the star of the wide receiver room in that game, and that bodes well for the future. And I know we have another wide receiver coming in from West Virginia. The name is escaping me at this moment, but
Hudson Clement.
yes, Hudson Clement. I mean, that just shows how great this offense can look next year, even without the likes of Zachary Franklin and Pat Bryant.
I mean, the receivers is what the most intriguing storyline for me was going to be with Pat Bryant gone. I knew we could count on Zachary, but this is a very talented wide receiver room, and it's no secret that Illinois knows that Luke Altmaier is entering his senior year as quarterback, and so they want to maximize the weapons around him. And so, they've been whispered to be going after some wide receivers out in the portal. And so for me, I really wanted to see if any of the young guys really would step up against an SEC defense. And it's not like South Carolina had a lot of guys opting out. Most of South Carolina's players were playing in that game. This was a game that both teams absolutely wanted to win. And you can see the emotion on the field. And as you mentioned, Hank Beatty was, arguably outside Josh McCray, our best player on offense. Some really clutch catches when we needed them most on third down. Malik Elsley, I think, only had one catch officially. He had one called back for a penalty, but he was on the field a lot. And I love seeing that because, he's the one who I think people are most worried about, potentially moving on. But between those guys, Colin Dixon had a big play. I was really happy with, what I saw from those young guys at the Citrus Bowl. But everything I've been reading about this Hudson Clement guy looks like he's going to be an Illini favorite next year. For the next 2 years, essentially. I think he's got 2 years of eligibility ahead of him. He seems like a guy who can slip right in to Zachari's spot on this previous season's team and, really just raise the ceiling of this, or the floor of this wide receiver room.
Yeah, I mean, he was the leading receiver for this West Virginia team last year, so it's not like he's not used to being the star of the show offensively. So it's not like he needs to gear up mentally to be that guy here at Illinois. So that's also great. But then you think of the running game as well that Illinois has with McCray and Lawfrey and Khalil Valentine. I mean, that is a great, formidable backfield for Brett Bielema in this offensive line to block for. You have the Thunder and Lightning, as Mark Jones kept saying last on that bowl game night with Lawfrey and McCray. I mean, just those guys. And the storybook of McCray being Brett Bielema's first recruit was also just amazing as well. I mean, this was as storybook as you could ever want for Illinois sports.
Yeah, and I'm so happy for Josh McCray and just where he's going to go down in Illinois history when it comes to his impact on this football team. Everyone knows about him being Brett's first recruit, but I think you and I talked about it when we started the show, Illinicast. He of course had a great freshman year, but then he just kept getting hurt, and we were wondering, does he even have a role on this team anymore? Is he a guy who is going to eventually just move on to the transfer portal? And let's be honest, if he did, not many Illini fans would be upset. We would be like, oh, we totally get it. We totally understand why he's moving on. It just didn't work out. He just constantly kept getting hurt. I know one guy who would have been upset, and that's Brett Bielema. And you can tell that the two have a very strong bond with one another. Brett trusts Josh so much so that every time we have a we're recruiting a running back, and he's in for an official visit, he stays with Josh. And you won't do that unless you 100% uh, have trust in that football player. So him having that fumble on that first drive and then being able to redeem himself with, I think he had, 114 yards or something like that with two touchdowns. What a storybook finish for him for the season, at least.
And locking the game down with that 60-yard
Oh,
run
yeah. Oh, yeah.
at the very, very end.
Oh,
That
yeah.
was borderline erotic, as Brett Bielema would say in a past life. That was just awesome. And plus, Josh is going to be needed to be that physical running back next year because hip injuries are weird, and I don't know what Caden Fagan's going to be bringing next year. He's a big physical body, and I don't discount anything that he can do recovery wise because he's so physical. But hips are a weird thing, and to have Josh McCray there is just going to be so impactful next year to match with whatever Caden can bring to the field.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like we don't obviously don't have to answer this question now, but are we 100% sure Caden Fagan is a starter next year on game one?
I think it will be all dependent on what the matchup is going to look like. If it's going to be like a bruising kind of game, maybe it's a McCray and Fagan, pick your poison kind of thing. But Aiden has shown that he can be the guy that's going to
Oh,
light you
sure.
up with speed. So if you're going up against a more finesse team, maybe that's the route you take. So or vice versa. So I think it's going to be matchup dependent. But again, it's all on the body of Caden Fagan right now to
And we
see
didn't even
how healthy
mention
he is.
we didn't even mention Khalil Valentine, who, in my opinion, when it comes to ceiling wise, looks better than any of the guys that we had. Just with some of the plays that he has as a true freshman this past year. Obviously, he's got to work on the other parts of being a college football running back, like blocking. But again, that room just looks really good. I mean, I don't expect everyone to stay. I imagine, maybe a guy who wants to see the field a little bit more, who might be, only having a year or two left, might want to find a spot somewhere else. But I know we keep saying this, but we've talked about this. We were comfortable with our quarterback coming in. We really like the wide receiver room next year. And quite honestly, the running backs room might be the best room that we have.
And possibly with JC Davis coming back as well. I mean, come on. Like, that would be just huge for this running game and for this passing game as well. Just getting a returnee. Not it doesn't show up in the transfer rankings or the recruiting rankings, but keeping a talent like that for an extra year just because of that new ruling of JUCO and NAIA players is absolutely large to have a chance to keep JC Davis around. And then defensively, I mean, a lot of zone defense against South Carolina. Really just keeping eyes on a Heisman Trophy contender for next year in Sellers. And there were moments where Sellers looked the part where you were like, yep, I can see that flash of that. And it kind of reminded me of when Illinois played Robert Griffin III in the Texas Bowl, where you were like, oh yeah, there's definite some of that in there. And then the first game of the next season, you see Robert Griffin just go off on TCU. But I think that's could be the case here, where Sellers does really well in the SEC next year, but this defense made him work for everything that he got, so whether it be rushing the ball or throwing the ball. And I think our defensive backs did a decent enough job, and I think our pass rush kept him contained for the most part.
I mean, Aaron Henry got a lot of, anger thrown his way after some games, in particular this season and certainly the season before. But I mean, he deserves all the respect in the world for that game against South Carolina. Granted, South Carolina's, running back was out, and so some of their offensive weapons were out. But just the game plan that we had the entire game was fantastic. And as you said, essentially Barry Lundy Jr. and Aaron Henry on each side of the football, I think won us that game. And then you just had the mind games that Brett Bielema was apparently playing with Shane Beamer, and this one's for the coaching staff. I think South Carolina's got a lot more 4 stars than we do. They even have, I think, a couple 5 stars on that football team. We don't have that kind of talent on our side, but I trust the guys calling the shots on our side more so than South Carolina, and I think that's what happened in the Citrus Bowl.
I was so happy that Coach Stepp got that victory over South Carolina after they fired him, and he was able to get his revenge as well. And then Brett Bielema, let's talk about that with Shane Beamer. And it really feels like Brett had the pulse of his team, like we were saying, but he also almost had the pulse of his opposition as well, knowing what would make them tick, knowing how to really expose them emotionally and schematically as well. And the substitutions, he was doing that all season long. That should not have been a surprise.
Right.
But there was just it was crazy how everything was so surprising to Shane Beamer and South Carolina. I mean, if Luke Altmaier is to be believed about that pregame festivity where they thought they were playing Syracuse, like how much did Beamer and his staff really prepare the South Carolina team for Illinois, which is an excuse or saying anything bad that Illinois won this game, but it does feel like Shane Beamer kind of let emotion run wild through his program that entire few weeks leading up to this bowl game.
It's nice seeing, like, Brett, even when he was the head coach of Wisconsin, was kind of, how do I say this? He had like jerk tendencies. He had
Yeah,
very, bleep word vibes to him. And sure, he's matured a bit, as he's grown older. This is 20 years later, essentially. But you can still see he has that, that moxie. And I think Illinois as a program needs that. We've just been down for so long that we need a guy who has has a level of confidence to him and sticks up for himself and the program. I talked about this before. Brett tried to get us involved in almost every CFP conversation before that bracket came out, and it was my opinion that it wasn't necessarily for this season. I don't think he necessarily probably felt that we were one of the 12 best teams in the country this year. But we've talked about all the talent that's coming back on next year's team. Right now, Illinois, especially with this win over an SEC team, now finishing 10-3, an Illinois team winning 10 games in 2024, returns, I think I saw like 85 or 86% of its snaps on next year's team. Well, next year, if we're able to be fortunate enough to replicate, being 9-3 or 10-2, really the only automatic loss on next year's schedule is Ohio State. Outside that, every other game is winnable. And so, next year, for me, the committee won't be so surprised seeing the name Illinois because they will have heard it the year prior. And we have a bowl game to prove that, hey, we beat SEC teams. And I think that's the ultimate goal of what Brett's always thinking long term, short term and long term. And I think, all these battles that he's having, whether it's with other head coaches on the field or just writers and committee members. It's all for the purpose of the betterment of Illinois football.
yeah. I mean, I think he's tired of Illinois being a sleepy program as well. Like he wants them to be in the news cycle. He wants them to be a part of the larger college football world instead of being the University of East Central Illinois like it's been in many years past. He wants Illinois to be a national brand too. So I think with all of that, I mean, he's doing everything right and he's building the program in a sustainable way. He doesn't believe in like the microwave system of just building a college football program. He's done it through the backs of helping out with recruiting in Illinois and recruiting in the high school ranks, and plus building those relationships. So whenever a player does decide to go to an Alabama, hypothetically, then whenever he transfers, he's like, all right, I had a great relationship with Brett during the recruiting process, and Illinois has a great NIL package to boot, so I will go to Illinois for my last 2 years, or hypothetically, or whatever that is. So, I mean, that is just the benefit of Brett Bielema right now, and Illinois could not be in a better position moving forward.
Lucky man. I think that should be the title of the show, right? It's just a good time to be an Illini fan. And, we've mentioned his name a couple of times, but we just haven't talked about it much. Josh Whitman. How fortunate is it that he's an alum of our University of Illinois? The fact that he seems, it's not just football, it's not just men's basketball. It looks like he's made the right hire, when it comes to women's basketball, and which historically, arguably, was the worst program in Power Five. The guy just gets it, and he knows what to look for in a coach. Sure, it didn't work out with Lovey, but I get what he was trying to do with Lovey. And again, the pivot beyond Lovey, again, he's hit a home run where I think we could have pulled 1,000 Illini fans, and I don't think Brett Bielema would have finished in the top 3 of coaches that we would have hired personally if we were in charge. But
No, I mean,
go ahead.
yeah, I mean, we were all watching that Buffalo MAC championship game. Like, it was nobody's, like, it was everybody Illini fans' business to be like, I'm going to scout our next head coach. Like, that's what we were doing. And then we woke up the next day, Brett Bielema, head coach. And we also got reports of how Josh Whitman evaluates coaching talent pretty well. I mean, he was looking firmly at Marcus Freeman, and that was before Marcus Freeman was Marcus Freeman that we all know that's going to be in the college football playoff semifinal. I mean, I don't know what Marcus Freeman would have done at Illinois, being that young in his career, without having done it at a further level. But that just shows how good Josh Whitman is at seeing talent in the coaching realm and how it can help the University of Illinois. So that's another great positive of Josh Whitman right there.
Even on the basketball side, I forget who the name was. I believe it's the guy who Indiana ultimately hired. When we had the opening, everyone thought Josh was at the tournament to scout. What's it?
Archie.
Archie? Yeah, I was going to say, was
Yeah.
it Archie? But then it turns out, Josh was actually there to watch Brad Underwood. And then, he had a conversation with Brad, who at that point had only been at Oklahoma State for a year, but he saw something in Brad. And we're so grateful that he has, because, Brad Underwood has turned our program to, playing on the Wednesdays of Big Ten tournaments, to a team now that, over the last 5 years has more victories than any other team in the conference, and one of the odds-on favorite. And again, he's just different, right? He's willing to adapt constantly, and at a program like Illinois, that's kind of what we need.
Absolutely. Sonny, it's been awesome with this Illinois football season. There's going to be a lot of news coming out, I'm sure, with drafts and transfers and all that kind of stuff coming about for Illinois football. We will be here to cover it. Illinois basketball is just on a unbelievable hot streak, beating Missouri and then beating Oregon like this. Don't even talk about Chicago State, that winless program, but that's where Illinois basketball's at. We'll be here talking about that throughout the weeks leading up to the NCAA tournament. Sonny, any closing thoughts on this Illinois basketball team or Illinois football program or anything before we wrap up?
Not closing. It's simply one of those, let's just enjoy this ride. We just got to the finish line when it comes to the football team. This basketball team can be equally, if not more special. Every single game, it's one of those where we can beat an Oregon at Oregon by 32 points one night. And I truly believe there's a chance that this team is so young, we can lose to one of the worst teams in the conference, like Washington, on Sunday. That's just the roller coaster ride that this team is going to put us on. But when it comes to just absolute ceilings and potential, when this team plays at its peak, which we got a glimpse of on Thursday night, it's a team that they can beat anybody. And that includes, a late March matchup against a number 1 seed. If that number 1 seed catches Illinois on the wrong night, Illinois is moving on, and that number 1 seed's not going to be happy afterwards.
Well, Sonny, this has been a great episode of Illinicast. And again, this is Illinicast. Like, share, and subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at Illinicast. And we are part of the Armchair Illini Network. Alex and Kirkland have done a great job with all this chaos and all this glorious chaos for Illinois sports in the written content. So follow them on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, everywhere on social media. Consume their articles. They're phenomenal. at Armchair Illini. This has been the Illinicast. So Sunny ILL,
I and I.
and that has been the Illini Cast.